Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. We got a big crowd here today. I don't know if you can see on screen, but they're all doing the wave. It's really unbelievable. So, it's a real party over here, and people have asked me if you can. Come and see the live filming. They want to come in from America. Everybody is entitled to come. You can take your picture in front of the famous bookcase over here. And, I just hope it doesn't fall down because it's falling apart. But, should anything happen, we're not covered. Anyway, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Someone just commented and said, one day you'll get that down. Yeah, I am, because the producer wrote it out for me. So Baruch Hashem, we remember all that. And we have a sponsor for this episode, sponsored by the Dorfman family in honor of Rabbi Orlofsky. Thank you. And Mazel Tov on the show's 6th anniversary. Wow. Hard to believe, huh? We're in our 7th year that we're doing this. And, I mentioned this last time that I go through this every single time where I just say, what should I talk about? Because I had a lot of stuff on my mind when I started this thing. But, over 7 years, 250 episodes, give or take, you think, okay, what do I have left to say? Now, Baruch Hashem, I always have something to say, but it doesn't always come to you off the top of your head. One of the more frustrating experiences that I get is when people say to me, oh, Rabbi Orlofsky, tell me a joke. So I'm not a comedian, that would be an actual profession. I don't tell jokes per se. I say things over in a funny way, and sometimes I'll access a joke to bring a particular point, but I don't have like jokes ready to go if I was on a talk show, and they say, oh, so tell me about your brother, you know what I mean? One of those kind of routines. I don't always have one. I just have a certain level of credibility that what I'm saying over must be funny so that I can walk into an audience and go, good evening, and get a big laugh out of that, in and of itself. If someone says, tell me a joke, good evening, that's not so funny. But in fact, my good friend Zev Wiener, who lives in North Miami Beach, and I had to fly back after my daughter's surgery. We were in America, and we had to fly back through Miami. So he says, listen, I'll pick you up, and you can stay by us for the night, and I'll take you back to the airport in the morning. And, we were originally just going to stay at the airport and get off at a hotel, but like this, I got in Ma'ariv with a minion, I got in Shachris with a minion, I got supper, I got breakfast. Gewaldig. Anyway, so one of his kids there said, tell me a joke. And he said, before you start, I've listened to all of your material. I know all your jokes. So I said, but you never heard my parrot jokes. And he said, that's true. I never heard parrot jokes. I have an unusually large collection of parrot jokes, more than anybody would possibly imagine. I'm not going to tell them to you now, but just suffice it to say that if I ever get stuck, I'm going to tell you my parrot jokes. So I have certain categories of jokes, parrot jokes. I have more than a person would think makes sense. It reminds me when someone asked Seinfeld, how many cars do you own? And he said, not the amount that you would say, yeah, that makes sense. So that's how many parrot jokes I have. But anyway, so it's the same thing when I sit down to think of a topic. What do I want to talk about? Now, if I was organized, I would probably write down things as they occurred to me, and I'd have a list of topics, and I would probably research them and, think about it beforehand, but I don't. I just sit down and say, okay, what should I talk about? And whatever comes up. So that's what I did. And a member of our studio audience said, well, have you ever talked about Tu B'Shvat? And I said, I'm sure I talked about Tu B'Shvat. I've definitely sung the English version of the Tu B'Shvat song in the past, but have I ever spoken about Tu B'Shvat? So I did a quick search of past videos, and granted, I looked for Tu B'Shvat, so it could be it has a different title, but I didn't see that I've ever actually talked about Tu B'Shvat. I've spoken about Hanukkah and Purim. I've spoken about Shavuos and Pesach and Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I don't know if I've ever spoken about Tu B'Av, but I'm pretty sure I spoke about Asar B'Teves. I don't think I ever spoke about Tu B'Shvat. So if I did, well, you're going to hear it again. And if I didn't, so this should be a first time for you. And to show you how committed I am, I put on a green tie. And I had a different green tie, which wasn't in great shape. My wife found this brand new green tie, and it came with a little pocket chiff, which I have never worn in my life. My father, who was quite the clothes horse, was always trying to get me to do things like that, and I never did. He used to say to me, "You're a young kid. Why do you dress like an undertaker?" You know, and I did. My father was always much cooler than I was. He was. You know, he had all the cool clothes in the 60s and 70s, and I wore dark somber suits and white shirts and called everyone my child. Yes, my child. I was planning on becoming a Rav. But anyway, so I actually, that's how committed I am to this program that we have here, that I would actually put in a pocket shift. And on the subject of committed, okay, we mentioned last time about the theme song. Lenny Solomon wrote the theme song, and he said the reason is that when he was on the show, he said, I should really write you a theme song. And then he knew that, a person should not say something unless they mean it. He says, so I said it, even though it was in passing, and he wrote me a theme song because of that. So somebody, one of my many avid listeners, sometimes they call themselves Rabbi Orlofsky crazies. I don't use that title myself, but I just repeat what I hear. So one of them pointed out that I have mentioned Rabbi Orlofsky merch on a number of occasions, and I've never made it available. And they put together a compilation of every single time I said it. And I have to say, when confronted with all of that evidence, I said to myself two things. One is, I shouldn't have kept saying that if I did not intend to make something available. And also, there are people who have too much time on their hands. Why are you collecting every time I ever mentioned merch on any of my podcasts? But I guess if I'm going to be a man of my word, and there is no evidence so far that I am, but I guess we will have to look into actually making some merch available to people, since I know there are people who have been asking me for the Rabbi Orlofsky mug. That's why I didn't even bring it in for this episode. Maybe the next one I'll bring it out. But just because I'm so embarrassed that I've been promising merch and I didn't have any. So we'll see. We'll see. In fact, you know that I'm also a cartoon character, Rabbi Sitter, in the Torah Live videos. In fact, Torah Live right now is having a special offer for people who listen to the Rabbi Orlofsky show. You'll see on the screen a special code that you can put in and get 10% off if you decide to join Torah Live and get access to all of their material. So he made a Rabbi Sitter doll, and I have been bugging him, why don't you produce this? Because there are a lot of people out there who find Rabbi Sitter just the most adorable thing in the world. And in fact, I just recorded for Torah Live a series of videos on health for kids. And one of them is we're going to be putting out an exercise video with Rabbi Sitter. I remember at one point I said, this is a little hard for me to do because, even though I'm in shape, this shape is square because I'm a sitter. So it's a little hard to do this exercise. But so the fact is that I said to him, why don't you make it? And here I am giving somebody else advice that they should be making merch so that all little children can snuggle up with a Rabbi Sitter doll. And I myself keep promising to put out merch. I was not promising, but I have offered the suggestion. So, B'li Neder, you can expect by the next episode that I will have thought about it. Anyway, so more than that, I can't guarantee, but definitely it will be something that will enter into my general consciousness. Okay, so just throw that out. So I don't even manufacture it, but when I used to do my Pesach videos, I have this matzah tie. I've gotten people who ask me, where can I buy the matzah tie? I don't know. I bought it in some Svarim store once upon a time. So I guess we'll have to add that on to the Rabbi Orlofsky merch, etc. So very good. All right, that's our little bits of business. I didn't get any mean emails to read because I can get a whole episode out of that, but I keep getting all these nice ones. I should really read them at one point, just because everyone keeps trying to reassure me that we really like you and don't listen to everybody who says you're yucky. And but I'm really looking for the ones that say I'm yucky because those are a lot more fun. Anyway, so as somebody once said, the despair I can handle, it's the hope I can't take, So when people say bad things, that's okay. All right. Yeah, as you can tell, I forgot to take my Ritalin this morning also. So I'm just wandering around. But yeah, so I said I wanted to talk about Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is a decidedly minor holiday. What is Tu B'Shvat all about? And ironically, I just made some Rabbi Siddur videos about the topic of Tu B'Shvat. So it's amazing that here on the Rabbi Orlofsky show, we've never talked about it. So let's talk a little bit about Tu B'Shvat. What is the significance of Tu B'Shvat? It's a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah where it says, Arba Rosh Hashanim Haim. There are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Now, we all know of Rosh Hashanah being, of course, on the 1st of Tishrei, where it's the day of judgment for the entire world. When we say Rosh Hashanah is always a Yom Adin. It's always judgment. Why? Because Kol Hatchala, any beginning, requires judgment. Meaning, before you start a project, you always have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Unfortunate thing that some people don't. They just start doing something and they never ask themselves if they should do it. I spoke about making decisions, I definitely in an earlier podcast, but I'll just bring the mashal that I brought when I was in Camp Sdei Chemed, which was a touring camp in Eretz Yisrael. I was there in the early 1970s. So they would bring along snacks. Now snacks they have this in Eretz Yisrael, these enormous industrial-sized boxes of tasteless cookies. They come in like 3 or 4 different shapes, and they all taste like nothing. The closest an American can imagine, if they still make it, I don't know if they still make it, they used to make the Stella D'Oro assorted mix cookies. It was like, 12 different types of shapes and colors of cookies, and they all taste exactly the same, like sort of like kichel, but not quite. Doesn't have the same flavor. But the only one people still know today are the Swiss fudge cookies, because they put a little chocolate in them. But imagine the Swiss fudge cookies without any fudge in it, So that was what Stella D'Oro made. And very often you'd go to a shul for Shalosh Shudas, and they would always put a box of the Stella D'Oro assorted cookies that were 35 years old. They had bought it when the shul first started, and nobody eats them. Every now and then someone comes and tries one, and they're like, well, why are we eating this, And that's why it lasts a very long time. It's also very economical from that point of view. You can keep putting out a box of cookies, secure that no one's going to eat it. But anyway, so they have these giant boxes of cookies, and, these are teenagers out on a tour, hungry, because they bring around boxes of cookies. I've eaten some of these cookies, and they're impossible. They right away turn into powder. They disintegrate into powder, and you can't even swallow it. It gets stuck in your mouth, and you're like choking. The only substance known to man that can wash this away is petal, and that's why they serve petal. Petal, for you who are unfamiliar, in England, I think they call it squash. It's basically this sort of like syrup that you add to water and make, think of Kool-Aid, but made in Chernobyl after the nuclear explosion. And that was what petal is. This stuff is like, it's one of the reasons Israelis are the way they are, because they drink petal. And so it just does something to your brain, So this is the only thing strong enough to wash away this stuff. So you eat this stuff. They're totally tasteless. They're turning to powder in your mouth. They're horrible. But the guy goes around with the box of cookies when we have a stop. Says, you want a cookie? Sure. People take 2 or 3. There's plenty of them, Everybody's taking cookies. And the guy comes to me, says, "You want a cookie?" And I said, "No." He wasn't even able to process the answer. So he just says again, "Do you want a cookie?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Everyone eats a cookie." And I said, "They are totally tasteless. They turn to powder in your mouth and I choke on them. Why would I want to eat them?" And the people around me are all nodding. Yeah, they are terrible cookies. And the guy just shrugs and goes to the next guy. "Want a cookie?" And the guy says, "Sure." And he just takes them, because most of the time we do things mindlessly. So sometimes we start on a project without asking ourselves whether or not this needs to be done or not. Why am I doing this? And so that's why before you start anything, you have to first ask yourself, before I ask how I should be doing this, the question is, should it be done at all? Is it necessary? I live in Har Nof. If you've ever been to Har Nof, there's a street there called Rojin. I used to live in Rojin. And, most of Har Nof is, I can't really say hilly. Kew Garden Hills is hilly. This is mountainous. You need equipment to get from one side of the neighborhood to the other, If you're at the bottom and you look up, it looks like the land of Oz, up there on a mountain, and you're counting, going up to see the gods on Mount Olympus. It's just unbelievable, There used to be this staircase going from Scholzen up to Agassi, where I lived. I counted it, 212 steps. It's just, amazing, all the way up, and it's tremendous. So on Rojin, there's a flat place to make a playground. Unfortunately, though, they built a giant ramp and put it on there. I guess they figured the kids won't have enough exercise if they just go and play on a playground. So we took the playground and put it on this enormous ramp. So I asked, why did they do that? Now, I have a good friend of mine, Dovid Wilner, who we were in LA, NCSY together, out in California. And when I first came, he had already made Aliyah, and I was totally lost. And he said to me, "I'll help you, but let me tell you the ground rules. You can ask where, you can ask how, you can ask when. You can never ask why." And that's the most frustrating thing when you first make Aliyah, is you tend to say, "Why would anybody?" And he'd say, "You can ask when, you can ask where, you can ask how, you can't ask why. There are no whys." Kacha. There's so many things that just don't make any sense whatsoever. But, get used to it. So I asked the question anyway, why would they do that? And someone said to me, "You can ask where, you can ask why." But I researched this, and it turns out that originally, Rojin, which has only one exit, and one entrance and exit when you come in from Scholzen, they were supposed to build an exit going out the other way. So that, for example, when they built Supersol supermarket, which is now called Yesh, they said, but the trucks cannot enter through Rojin because it'll block the traffic when the trucks are coming. And they said, yes, of course. And what did they do? They built the loading dock for the trucks on Rojin, so the trucks will block it. So the idea was there would be another exit to it. And they built the ramp, and when they were halfway through building the ramp, they said, nah, forget it. And they didn't build it. Yeah? And so there's just a big giant ramp in the middle of the street. Yeah? So people didn't really ask when they should do it. To me, one of the most amazing things is Route 9. So now, if you take Route 9 in New Jersey, it's pretty built up. But as a road, it doesn't make much sense. When they originally built it in the early 70s, it basically was a 6-lane highway going through totally empty land. It was a totally unnecessary highway that basically takes you from the Outer Bridge crossing from Staten Island all the way down to a rundown resort former resort town called Lakewood, New Jersey. Now it's a big, giant place. But back then in the early 70s, when Rav Aaron found the yeshiva, he took it because he said, no one will want to live in Lakewood, New Jersey. So the yeshiva will be able to stay in a nice, quiet area without any people around. Yeah. As Dr. Phil likes to say, how's that working out for you? Anyway, but that was the original plan, right? And they built this 6-lane superhighway, and as soon as it hits Lakewood, it turned into a 2-lane country road. And they said, why in the world would anyone have built this highway? It made no sense. So apparently what I read once upon a time was they were actually planning on developing Atlantic City already into a gambling mecca. And they had built this giant highway to get there. And after they had reached that far, they decided to go with a different route. So they built this whole 6-lane superhighway for nothing. That's really something you should think about beforehand. And that's why people embark on projects without really thinking about it. But whenever you do something, you have to first think about it. Sof ma'aseh b'machshava techila. Before you do something, think about it, or what they call make a preliminary study. Before you build a highway, see whether or not anyone needs this highway. Before you develop a new product, figure if anybody wants your product. Because imagine how silly you'll feel if you spent all this time developing something that nobody wants. And this has happened a number of times in recent history, where they made something, one of the prime examples, there have been books written about it. Ford made a car which he named after his son, Edsel. And today, the Edsel is the byword for a project that is a dismal failure. They made this car with everything that they thought people would want. The only thing they didn't do is find out if anybody wanted it. And it became a terrible clunker. Nobody bought it because nobody wanted it. As first, you should find out whether or not anybody wants it. Sometimes you develop something that is so expensive that it's just not marketable. Nobody's willing to pay that amount of money for it until you can figure a way to make it less expensive. Nobody's going to buy it. So you have to first think. Yeah, so every beginning brings with it din. So a Rosh Hashanah is by definition a Yom HaDin. So Rosh Hashanah, which is the din for people, that is the day when HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to decide, is it worth making a world for these people? And he has to look at us and decide, so was this a failed experiment? Should I start over? Right, like we did in the Mabul? Or is this world worth saving? Is there something here that we can develop? And that's why I've always said this, whenever you start off, you have to decide why I'm doing this. Or as I like to say, definitions. And I've told this story before. I was giving a vad to guys in the Mir about dating. They asked me to give a vad about dating. And the first question I started with was, why should you get married? And not one guy could give me a coherent answer. And I said, you understand, you guys are already dating. It's just dumb luck that you didn't find somebody you like already and get married. And you would have gotten married and have no idea why you should get married. And don't feel bad. You can ask people who've been married for 10 years. They can't answer the question either. So why should I get married? And when you ask those kind of questions, when I used to teach in seminary, I ruined a lot of girls because I taught them how to think. And it's a disadvantage in our world today if you think, So like a girl would go out on a date and the guy says, I want to learn long term. And she'd say, why? And he was like, what? Why? Do you want to become a Rosh Hashiva or a Maggid Shir? Do you want to do this for a certain period of time and then, go to work? Do you want to just learn Torah Lishma till the day you die? And they would look at them and say, because everybody learns long term. I don't know. Nobody ever stops to think about it. So That's the Robert Frost poem Mending Wall, where he says the stone wall fell down between their two properties, and they went to put it back up. And I said to my neighbor, why? My apple trees won't lean over and eat your peaches. And he repeated what he heard from his father, fences make good neighbors. And this is the important line. And he liked the way it sounded so much, he said it again as if it was his own idea. Fences make good neighbors. And he says, I think people are lonely because they build fences instead of bridges. But the point is that people just repeat what they heard without stopping to think about it. So when a person says, I just want to be a good person, no problem. What is that? What is a good person? People set out to live a meaningful life. Everybody wants to live a meaningful life, but they have no idea what it is. And that's why they reach a certain point in their life when they have a midlife crisis, because I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted and I followed this through and it's not what I wanted. Here I am. I don't know if you see people in midlife, they suddenly change their profession. They thought they wanted to do something and, they decided to go in a different direction. Monty Python's Flying Circus, which was a group of highly educated individuals who made a comedy show. Just tells you where we are as a society, but I loved it. But they have this guy who comes to a career advisor, and he says, look, I've been an accountant, my whole life, and I decided I want something more interesting. He says, all right, what are you thinking of? I was thinking of becoming a lion tamer. He says, I don't know if that's a good move for you, And anyway, as the guy's talking, he realizes he doesn't really know what a lion is. He thinks it's an anteater, So he shows him a picture of a lion, he goes, well, this is a lion. And he goes, rah, it's like, oh my goodness. Maybe that's too much of a change for me. I think I'll try going to become an actuary. That's enough of a move for me, So people set off on careers without asking themselves, where is this going? Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila, think it through. So every Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Adin. So there's different Rosh Hashanahs, and Tu B'Shvat, according to Beis Hillel, it's Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. According to Beis Hillel, Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah of the trees. It sounds like a very strange concept. A new year of the trees. I had a student once and asked me, what does it mean the trees have a Rosh Hashanah? I said, that's right. It's a judgment day for the trees. They dress up in white and they pray all day and they eat a human dipped in honey. I'm just kidding about that. By the way, you have to always be careful when you say things, I was speaking about how a lot of the Pesach story revolves around Dam. How the river turned to Dam, how one of the signs was that Moshe was supposed to take water, pour it on the ground, and it would turn into Dam. The Dam on the blood posts, V'damai Chayi, the Dam of the Korban Pesach, and the Dam of the Bris Milah, the Dam of the Christian child that we put into our matzahs. Anyway, I kept going, and I did this once in the Neve Yerushalayim, and I see girls writing it down. I was like, no. That one was a joke. We do not use the blood of Christian children in our matzahs anymore. At the last meeting of the elders of Zion, we outlawed that. You understand? So she's writing that down. I said, no, that's also, it's a joke. We don't have accounts of it. So you got to be careful. So no, we don't, the trees don't really dress in white. What does it mean? It is so incredibly unromantic. It is so technical. And it means basically like this. You have an obligation to take off Trumas and Maisvis from the fruit, from everything that you grow. Of this, 3 of them are dioraisis. There's only 3 things that grow that are dioraisis, take off Trumas and Maisvis. And that's olives, grapes, and grain. Okay, now, midrabanan, we take off Trumas and Maisvis on everything. You have to meiser everything. In fact, when I learned here back in 1975, there were very few places that had a badatz hashgacha to it. There was one falafel place that you could go to for a big night out with your friends. This was 1975. So you used to go and buy things basically in places that had a rabbanut hashgacha. And a lot of people didn't trust it. So they felt that they weren't doing a careful enough job, and it was a political organization, and okay, whatever. So when they would buy fruits and vegetables, or they'd go someplace with fruits and vegetables, they would take off trumas and maasros themselves. In fact, you had to go down to the badatz and get yourself a little coin of pruta chamura that you used to be podeh the maisa sheni that was in it. And you'd have to put down your coin and the food, and there was a little thing that you said, and you transferred you designated some of this food as maisa sheni, and then you would podeh it by putting it on the coin, and you could only use the coin for X number of times. I think it was like a 5 lira coin, and it worked for a certain number of times. Then you had to bring it back to the badatz, and then they had to transfer all the pruta chamuras out of it, and then you could use it again. It was a very interesting process. And people would, take off their own trumas and maasros. Now, you're buying cucumbers and tomatoes, midiraisa, you don't have to maisa those things. It's midirabbanan. So now, how do you figure when to take off the trumas and maasros? Meaning, there's a din in the Torah that you cannot take off from this year's crop for next year's crop. So, I harvest some of my grain in Elul. I harvest some of my grain in Tishrei. I want to take off trumas and maasros. I cannot mix the two of them together and take off trumas and maasros. I have to take off last year's by themselves and this year's by itself. Therefore, I have to know what is the date of the cutoff, and the answer is Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei. That determines what the Rosh Hashanah is for each one of those. There's a machlekes when I have to take off Maisa Behema, 1 out of every 10 animals that were born this year. Do I have to do it in Rosh Chodesh Elul or Rosh Chodesh Tishrei? They'll argue. So that's Maisa Behema. So the animals that were born before Rosh Chodesh Elul or after Rosh Chodesh Elul, I have to Maisa them separately. What about fruit that grows on a tree? And like I mentioned, 2 of these are dioraisa, grapes and olives. Not to mention apples and pears and peaches and plums, and all those other kind of things. It does not go by Rosh Hashanah because it goes by fruit, regular vegetables that you pick, grain that you harvest, goes by the time of the harvesting. Meaning, it doesn't matter when my tomatoes ripened. It doesn't matter when my grain ripened. It matters when I harvest it. That's considered the year for trumas and maasros. So for everything, it goes by Rosh Hashanah. But for the fruit of the tree, it doesn't go by when you pick it. It goes by the chanota. What is the chanota? Well, if you've ever seen a fruit tree, you know first they blossom. You, of course, know that halacha because on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you're supposed to make a bracha on the fruit trees that are flowering. And if you don't do it immediately on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you can do it other times. If you subscribe to the Hamodia, in the picture section, you'll always see pictures of various Rebbes and Rabbanim going out on Rosh Chodesh Nisan and making the birchas Eilonos on the flowering trees. Those are the flowering trees. After the flower falls off, it forms a bud, and the bud develops into a fruit, which is known as the Abbot. I'm just kidding. That's Bud and Abbott Costello. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Anyway, but no, that's called the little bud. Once it forms a bud, the bud now is going to ripen into a fruit. Yeah. So from the time that the bud forms, that's where it goes. But the cutoff date by trees is not Rosh Chodesh Tishrei like it is for everything else. It goes by Tu B'Shvat. So if the fruit formed a bud before Tu B'Shvat, they are considered last year's fruit. If they form the bud after Tu B'Shvat, they're called this year's fruit. So Tu B'Shvat is the new year of the trees in regard to when the fruit buds in order to decide which year you take off the Trumas and Maasros. It's got to be one of the most boring holidays I've ever heard of. Yeah, that's it? I mean, Tu B'Av, the girls used to dress in white and go out and dance in the vineyards. That's a holiday. You understand? I don't care if it's a big holiday or not. That's a kind of holiday I'm looking forward to. But I'm celebrating when the bud took place and when it didn't. So there's a lot more than that to it. And that's because we're making a difference between trees and vegetables. What's the reason for this? Because there's a difference between trees and vegetables. Yeah. From trees, you get wine, which is brought in the Beis HaMikdash. From trees, you get oil, which is brought in the Beis HaMikdash. From trees, you get 5 of the Shivas Aminim, which are brought as Bikurim. Vegetables? Okay, wheat is made into flour, which is brought in the Beis HaMikdash. Grain has a special status. But vegetables? Tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, carrots, radishes. They don't have any special status. Yeah. They're important for good health. They're filled with micronutrients, particularly cruciferous vegetables like broccoli. Yeah. So they give you a lot of nutrients that you should be having. Does it sound like I'm spending too much time on the topic of vegetables? Yes, I am. Why is that? That's because I'm pretty sure I told this story already, but since it's such a part of my life, I don't mind repeating it. About 11 years ago, I had a heart attack and a double bypass. And about 1.5 years ago, I had 3 stents put into the other artery. It was a very long procedure. And then one of them closed up, and I had to go back in before Sukkot and have another procedure. And afterwards, when I met with the doctor who had performed the angioplasty, he said, "Look, I'm running out of options. We're not going to open up your chest again. There's no more room for any more stents. And the other 2 stents I can't operate on. So you better do something. Yeah. You better change the way you're eating, get your diabetes more under control, and do something. Alternatively, don't start any long books." So I had been on a diet some years ago on a dare. My personal trainer basically dared me to do it. And it's called the Dr. Furman diet, where you basically eat vegetables, nuts, seeds, and beans, legumes, and a little bit of fruit. That's it. No meat, no chicken, no dairy products, no fish, no oil, no salt. Yeah. And he claims that he has studies that prove that it actually reverses arteriosclerosis. It can actually clean out your arteries. So I went on it on a dare, and I stayed on it for the summer. And then Rosh Hashanah came, and I was like, I'm not going to have all the Rosh Hashanah foods. Please, there's simon, for bracha. So I ate all those foods, and then I continued eating them for the next several years without any break. Anyway, so I have always said to myself, I mean to go back onto this diet, much as I say A person sent me an email where it says, I miss going to the gym today. That makes 4 years. So I mean to go back on it. But this was desperate, and I went on this diet. And he stresses the value of eating vegetables, particularly cruciferous vegetables, because of the micronutrients. And he points out that very often people who are overweight are in fact starving, because the garbage food that they're eating doesn't have the nutrients their body needs. And so their body is starving. That's why it tells you to keep eating, because they're hoping maybe just by mistake you'll have some broccoli. You know what I mean? It might go in the beef and broccoli that you had in the Chinese restaurant, something, and get some nutrients into your body. So I went on this diet and I lost 25 pounds. And it doesn't make any sense. And like a relatively short period of time. And I think it's because my body was listening when the doctor was talking. And the body says, listen, between me and you, I don't care if you're fat. It's inconvenient for you. You have trouble tying your shoes. You have to buy your shoes, your clothes in the big men's department. I don't really care. But now I'm going to die. Uh-oh, we better get serious. And so I think my body just decided on its own, listen, you eat the vegetables, I'll take care of the rest. So I have this. It's interesting. The Rishalmi says that you're not allowed to live in a town where they don't have vegetables. You have to eat vegetables, And one person said to me, look, animals eat vegetables and I eat the animals. It's just more an efficient system, but it doesn't really work that way. You have to actually eat the vegetables. So they're healthy for you, but you don't find that they have religious significance. Trees have religious significance. Let's take it a step further. The Ramban asks, why was Gan Eden called Gan Eden when there were only trees? When you have only trees, it's called the Pardes, an orchard. When you have vegetables, it's called a Gina. That's a garden. Why is it called Gan Eden? And he says, because in the good old days, trees were not planted in rows. They just grew wherever. You can see sometimes when you go around Eretz Yisrael and you come to an olive orchard, the trees are just all over the place. I saw it in Spain as well. They just, wherever they grow, they grow. They're not planted with that kind of forethought. But vegetables, which you're going to harvest over and over again, you plant them in rows, right? And so Gan Eden, even though it was a place of trees, was called a Gan because it was planted in rows. So you see that Gan Eden is all trees. And interestingly enough, Gan Eden, which is not only a term that we use for paradise, where Adam and Chava were put, but we also refer to Olam Haba as Gan Eden. Isn't it interesting that Olam Haba is described as a place of trees, as was paradise in this world, a place of trees? Wait, it gets better. There's something else that's called a tree. Eitz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba. It is a tree of life to those who cling to it. The Torah itself is called a tree. There's another thing that's called a tree, because although Eretz Yisrael is referred to as Eretz Zavas Chalav Udavash, a land flowing with milk and honey, it has another designation in Parshas Ekev. Eretz Chita Saira Gefen Teina Virimon. Right? It is called the land of the Shivas Aminim. Eretz Yisrael is defined by the 7 species. Now, granted, 2 of those are not trees per se, right? Wheat and barley. But the other 5 are, of course, fruit. And that's why the Shivas Aminim are wheat and barley, dates and figs, grapes and olives. And it's amazing how often people forget the 7th, because it doesn't have a pear. You understand, wheat and barley, they're both grain. You understand? Grapes and olives are both used to be squeezed to make stuff out of. Figs and dates, they sound alike, ta'ena and tamar, People sometimes even need to remember. So you say, I remember Tamar as a date because I went out on a date with Tamar. So that's how I never went out with ta'ena, But figs and that kind of thing. But people forget pomegranates. Doesn't have a buddy, Rimon. Lahavdil, it's the same problem when they try to remember the seven dwarfs, So remember Dopey and Doc, one smart, one stupid. You remember Happy and Grumpy, right? They're the opposites. You remember Sneezy and Sleepy because they both have serious conditions. And people forget Bashful. He's the Rimon of the seven dwarfs. Anyway, so it's defined by these fruit. Now, what's different about trees and vegetables? I had a vegetable garden. Almost nothing that I planted grew. The only thing that I ever grew successfully were radishes, because you just throw them in the ground and they grow. And you pull them out of the ground, and there they are, the radish. Now, you could pull it out of the ground like in a couple of days, and there'll be a radish. It'll be a very small radish. If you leave it longer, it'll turn into a bigger radish. And the same thing is true with carrots. You throw it in the ground, you can get a little carrot. Leave it longer, you'll get a bigger carrot. The same thing is true with lettuce. After you plant it, you'll get a little lettuce, then you get a bigger lettuce. Same thing with tomatoes. If you plant it, you'll get a little tomato. Eventually get a big tomato. Unless you planted cherry tomatoes, then they won't get much bigger. But vegetables are basically the same. And they're really not high maintenance. Tomatoes are a little harder. You have to put a little stick there so that the vine grows up on it, etc. But most of the vegetables, you just toss them in the ground and they grow. If you don't want to have a bunch of bugs in it, then you have to spend a lot more time keeping the bugs out of it, and using pesticides and stuff like that. But for the most part, they'll just grow. Same thing with herbs. All these things that grow in the ground. Let's say you want to plant a tree. So you take an apple seed and you put it in the ground. Now, of course, you're not going to do that. The reason you're not going to do that is because those of you who have children know you don't know what you're going to get. Every kid comes out and you're like, where did this kid come from? Doesn't take after me or my wife, or anybody else that I know, really. They seem to be an alien from another planet, They're just, or you see that, I have black hair and my wife has blonde hair. So by statistics, a quarter of our kids will have blonde hair and the rest of them will have black hair. And then I get this one redhead. Where did that come from? And we have to go back in the family and hopefully we'll find someone with red hair. Otherwise, we have to check the neighbors. But, where did it come from? Why? Because there's all kinds of genetic possibilities and all kinds of recessive genes. So they never plant apple seed because you don't know what you're going to get. They're constantly crossbreeding trees till they get fruit that's going to have the right taste, the resistance to disease. So when they want to plant another tree, they actually cut off a branch and stick it in the ground. So it's basically cloning the tree. That's the way that they do it, right? So some people are thinking about that. So I'll have a kid, I could just clone myself and all my kids will be just like myself. And that's just too frightening for the entire world to consider, as it is. It's bad enough that there's one of me. But, but you never know what you're going to get. But let's say Johnny Appleseed, you're going around throwing seeds in the ground. So eventually it's going to sprout. And you're going to get a sapling. There's nothing you can really do with the sapling. You have to just take care of it. And eventually the sapling will grow into a small tree, an atzitz. So you think, I forgot what kind of a tree I planted. I'll take a little bite from it. And you'll find that it has a distinctive woody taste. It just tastes like a piece of wood. A peach tree, the wood doesn't taste like a peach. A plum tree doesn't taste like a plum. That, by the way, was one of the things that Kadosh Baruch Hu was upset with the trees. I told you that the trees should taste like the fruit. This way, when I plant a bunch of trees, I know what I have there. Instead, I have no idea what's there. I just have to keep taking care of the tree until it grows to the point that it produces fruit. That's a long wait. It takes a lot of effort to get fruit off of a tree. Forget about the Gemara with Choni Amagal, where he sees this guy planting a carob tree. And he says, it takes 70 years to get fruit from a carob tree. And the guy says, I know, but when I was born, there were already carob trees, which means somebody planted it with me in mind. So I'm going to plant this for the next generation. So Choni Amago goes to sleep. And unbeknownst to him, he wakes up 70 years later. Yeah. Somebody asked me a question once, who's the biggest, and by the way, eventually he goes to the Beis Medrash and nobody believes that he's Choni because Choni lived 70 years ago. And there's nobody alive that's on his level to learn with. So he davens that he should die, and he goes back to sleep and passes away. Somebody asked me once, who's the biggest yeshiva guy, Choni Amagal or Avram Avinu? I said, I don't even understand the question. It says Avram Avinu, toured all around Eretz Yisrael. So that's your typical yeshiva guy. He's always running around on Tiyulim. Or is it Choni Amagal, who slept for 70 years, got up, went to the Beis Medrash, saw his chavrusa wasn't there, and went back to sleep? I said, this is a very profound question. I have to think about it. So I sent it over to my son, and he said, it can't be Avram Avinu. It says, V'yash came baboka. He got up early in the morning, so that's for sure not a yeshiva guy, But so he comes when he wakes up, and he sees somebody picking fruit from the tree. He says, how are you picking fruit from the tree? You just planted it. And the guy looks at him and says, I didn't plant this. My grandfather planted this 70 years ago, and now it's finally giving fruit. So it takes a lot of effort in order to be able to get the fruit of a tree, much more than vegetables. But what you get is much sweeter. You just can't compare the sugar content to fruit. In fact, they talk about the Paris Guinnessa, where they would get drunk from the sugar. There was so much sugar in the fruit that they fermented on the tree. So you actually got drunk from eating the fruit. That's how high the sugar content was. Now, you can find yourself a sweet tomato or a sweet pepper, but come on. You're comparing that to a date, You're comparing that to a sweet fruit. There's no comparison at all. So it takes a lot of effort, but the payoff is much better. And that's why, if to put it into a fancy term, the fruit of the trees are kona b'yisurin, with effort, with pain, with struggle. Eretz Yisrael nikna b'yisurin. The Chazal say that Eretz Yisrael is only acquired through sufferings. When I made Aliyah, as I mentioned, my good friend David Wilner said, I'll help you through the process. Other people just quoted me the Chazal. Eretz Yisrael nikna b'yisurin. Why am I going through this? Eretz Yisrael nikna b'yisurin. I said, yeah, but they don't have to add to it. It's enough already, I don't need a Chazon Ish's shear, as they say, an extra large shear of it. But Eretz Yisrael nikna b'yisurin. Now, the truth is that today you can't compare it. There were people who walked from Russia to Eretz Yisrael. There's an unbelievable book about the founding of Maskeret Batya, and the struggle these people went through to be able to keep Shemitah in the late 1800s, and the starvation and disease and the difficulties. There was no water supply in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. If when it rained, you filled up your cistern, and when it ran out, you had no water. Now, Eretz Yisrael nikna b'yisurin, now it's not so bad. A guy I know had to go for a procedure with his wife to someplace in Oklahoma, of all places. He comes in the doctor, and the lady says, where are you all you people from? I go, we're from Israel. And she goes, Zeke, you hear that? They're from Israel. He was reading his paper. He put it down. He goes, but do they have a Walmart? He says, no, we don't. He goes, picks up his paper. No, we do not have a Walmart. And but we do have an Oshahad. In fact, we exported that to America. That's bingo. It's really Oshahad. So there you go. But anyway, the Eretz Nikne B'Yisurin. Torah Nikne B'Yisurin. Somebody said once at a bris, Kishevish Nicholas the bris can you a Torah chuppah masam tovim. Says, how do you go into a bris? All dressed up, carried on a pillow, surrounded by friends and family. It looks so nice. And this kindly old rabbi comes up to you with a knife. You assume it's for the bagels. And how do you walk out of the bris? Bloody and crying. He said, Kachi kanis a Torah chuppah masam tovim. He says, and he told the story about this little boy is walking with his father and he sees his Rebbe. And the Rebbe says to the little boy, do you love the Torah? And he says, no, Rebbe, I hate the Torah. And his father gets upset. He says, no, he's right. When we start out the kid, we put a little drop of honey on the page, but that's the last time. Torah niknis b'Yisurin. Yeah, as it said in Parshas Yisro. V'saged l'bnei Yisrael dvarim koshin kegidden. It's hard. It takes effort. It takes yigiyah. Yagata umatzasa mehemna. If a person says, I struggle with the yigiyah with effort, believe them. But if he says, I got the Torah without effort, don't believe them. It's not possible. And olam haba is only by yigiyah. Why are we in this world, says the Mesilas Yesharim, for amal, kol ha'amal, that we do all our lives, all of our struggles, all of our efforts. So Gan Eden, Olam Haba, is a place of trees, and you kona it with effort. Torah, Eitz Chaim, is a tree, you kona it with effort. And Eretz Yisrael, you kona it with effort. Things that are very sweet take a lot of effort. Vegetables, you can live on vegetables. You can live in Chutz La'aretz. You don't have to learn Torah. You can go to a rabbi and ask him what the halacha is. And you don't have to go to Olam Haba. But anything that is sweet is compared to a tree. And we're in this world to celebrate Tu B'Shvat. We're in this world to understand the value of trees. And a person is compared to a tree. Right? Adam Eitz HaSadeh. A person is a tree that we are in this world to produce very sweet fruits, but that's only going to come with effort. As I've said many times, people don't choose to live meaningless lives. It's just easier to live a meaningless life than a meaningful life. So, Mirza Hashem, as we begin budding, why is Tu B'Shvat the cutoff point, says the Bar Tanura? Because the ground begins warming. I know it's kind of silly, those of you who live in temperate climates, it's still freezing cold. There are no leaves on the tree. Someone said to me once, how come on Tu B'Shvat there's a minhag to eat dried fruit? I said, because there is no fresh fruit. All the trees are dead. You know what I'm saying? You don't see anything. And if you look at the average tree, there's not a leaf. There's nothing. But on Tu B'Shvat, the ground begins to warm and the sap begins flowing through the tree, and the tree is starting to come back to life, whether you realize it or not. And that's the challenge that we have. We have to get the sap flowing to be able to work to produce those very sweet fruit. One of the things you do when you have a tree is you have to cull the fruit. You have to remove some of the fruit. Why? Because the tree has only so much energy. And if it's going to put it into making all these little fruit, you're going to have very small fruit. But if you remove them so they can concentrate on the larger fruit, the fruit will come out larger and sweeter. So too, we can only concentrate on so many things. And if we concentrate on the most important things, then we will have a much sweeter, better, more meaningful life. Well, that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can sign up for one of my online shiurim. If you want to see me as an animated character, you can sign up with the discount code in Torah Live. You can sponsor an episode. You can sponsor a question and answer. You can sponsor a Parsha in 5. You can, as someone asked me last week, you can download the theme song. There's a way to make it the ringer on your phone, but I don't know how. You can have articles there. You can get access to past Shurim. You can ask a question, make a comment. And that's it for this week. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.